Thank you very much, Trimita, and welcome everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Susanna. I'm going to turn on the video. Here we are. So my name is Susanna. I am with Public Services International, and on behalf of Focus on the Global South IT for Change Third World Network, I welcome you to this webinar on why does data governance matter for workers' rights. This is the third and last webinar in a series on digital trade and workers' rights. And we will follow a similar model than the previous webinars, which means that we will have 3 interventions, each of them followed by comments, questions, and around 30 minutes discussions at the end. And like the previous webinars, we really look forward for your active engagement so that this becomes a really interactive discussion. And as you know, we are amongst friends. Most of you know each other. So really do feel free to intervene and share your views as we go ahead. The only request is that while the other speakers, the interventions are going on, please keep your mics on mute so that it doesn't disturb the discussion. So before we move ahead to today's discussion, we would like to remind ourselves of what was discussed last time. And for that, I would like to invite Benny Corvilla from Focus on the Global South, who moderated the previous session, to give us a short summary.
Thank you. Presentations and discussions at the session last week were situated in the context of privatization of public services, which is a key agenda of the current government, but also drawing from previous regimes as well, which were also pushing privatization, as we know, for the last 2.5 decades or so. But the qualitative change that we're witnessing today is how the rise of big tech firms, which are today the world's largest and most powerful corporations, are now further accentuating the process of privatization. For example, the urban reform process in India, which began with the UPA government's NURM project, is now called the Smart Cities Project. And the Smart Cities Project is advancing outsourcing and the creation of undemocratic and unaccountable parallel bodies of governance, such as special purpose vehicles, SPVs, which are resulting in a number of contracts for private corporations in the area of water, sanitation, transport, including tech firms, the large tech firms for managing data and for surveillance of workers. And our first speaker, Jammu Anand from the Nagpur Municipal Employees Union, highlighted how this process was leading to 3 disturbing outcomes. One was a massive loss of public funds being paid out to these private entities. 2, the capture of public urban data by tech corporations, which will lead to private control over many public services. And the third point that he made was how this was also undermining workers' rights through surveillance. Similarly, in the health sector, the aggressive push by this government to digitize all health-related data is resulting in a windfall for private corporations such as IT companies and insurance firms. And Deepika Joshi from the Jan Swasthya Abhiyan argued that this manipulation of data by companies can be at the detriment of patients and public health. And lastly, at the level of international trade negotiations, the agenda is to push for the free flow of data, no rules to store data locally, no duties and taxes on online transactions. And Ranja Sengupta from Third World Network highlighted that this will lead to a sharp fall in government revenues as large tech firms will locate themselves in tax havens, and with no customs duties, this can lead to deindustrialization of countries like India if everything is imported duty-free. There are obviously other aspects that I've left out of this short summary, but just to let all of you know that we will send you all a comprehensive report of last week's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benny. So today we will go deeper into the question of the regulation and the systems, both infrastructure or policy system that govern data. And this will be done both in terms of data governance that promotes workers' rights at the workplace or in the broader world of work, as well as looking at data governance that promotes the public interest in our societies. We will discuss questions of data around individual data, data about you, about me as individuals, but also, and maybe even more importantly, data that is aggregated, anonymized, which is sometimes called mass data, and where individuals are not really what matter, but what matters are the patterns of our behavior as collective. And this is actually very important in public services, considering that public services can be both the source to collect such mass data, as well as potentially they can also be users of that data in order to be able to plan and design public services better. And the insights that allow to take decisions based on these mass data is sometimes referred to as digital intelligence. So that will be another element of our discussion. And until now, we have only spoken of instances where, in the two previous webinars, we spoke mostly of instances where data is owned and used by private company for profit, with a profit motive, in many ways privatized data. And today we also want to explore whether and how data governance can promote public or community ownership and control over data for workers' rights in the public interest, with the idea that data and data intelligence can be a public good for our societies. So for this, we have three speakers, V. Narasimhan, who is the General Secretary of the All India Life Insurance Corporation, of the All India Life Insurance Employees Federation, sorry. And he is also the South Asia representative for PSI Asia Pacific Regional Executive Committee. We will have Nandini Chami, who is the Deputy Director at IT for Change, and Zai Vipra, who is a researcher with the VD Center for Legal Policy. So without any delay, I will invite V. Narasimhan to speak about public data infrastructure and workers' rights in the Life Insurance Corporation. Narasimhan, please go ahead. You have 10,
Thank you,
12
Susanna.
minutes.
Actually, I was not sure whether I will be able to join this meeting today because I am from Hyderabad and the city is marooned because of torrential rains. Only some time back the power was restored. Thanks. We were talking about digitalization, the introduction of new digital technologies and communications, production and administration processes has become one of the key drivers of change in economies and societies worldwide. Digitalization in public services can be generally referred to as a whole range of consequences stemming from the interaction between the public service users and workers with new digital technologies, and refers to the economic, social, employment, and workplace transformations. Such
तकनीकी
consequences
ढंग से देखा जा रहा है
digital transformation in like Google, Apple, Microsoft,
दुनिया भर
and
की
many
कॉरपोरेशंस जो भी प्राइवेट कॉरपोरेशंस हैं
global
एप्पल
service
वगैरह
corporations that see digitalization in public services as a lucrative opportunity. And the same players also carry a major interest to access citizens, users, and business data to further develop their activities, as data is the next fuel of economic development. If you see the shapes and shades of digitalization, how it affects delivery, quality and access, employment, working conditions and labor rights. I would like to introduce you to the case of Life Insurance Corporation of India, which is a public sector undertaking. LIC is a public sector multinational financial conglomerate. LIC has been declared as best IT user many times in the past. Digitalization and computerization has been the hallmark of LIC much before the same came into focus. From computing machines, which were converting the data into magnetic media, and machines which filled many rooms, we have moved to an era where the systems are very strong and fast, yet very small in size and sometimes not physically visible also. Why digitalization in LIC? For rendering better services to the policyholders and for making the jobs being performed by employees more accurate, reduction in time, and also for upkeep of employee records. The key characteristics of the digitalization system in LIC. In contrast with other companies, the digitalization system is not outsourced but built in-house. This means LIC employees are trained to manage the systems, data infrastructure, collection of data is done at the branches, and the servers are located at the divisional offices. As the updation is being done in real time, in future, the servers may be centralized in a few places. Earlier, the data stored in magnetic media form, now cloud computing is being used. There are clear protocols to manage the data that is collected from LIC users. This is more about individual data protection and privacy issues. Generally, in the office systems, no pen drive, no CD, no Wi-Fi, wireless connectivity allowed in office systems. Hence, data security is ensured. Every office has a core group of employees and administrators. They have the permissions to manage the data. Every action of the core group is documented in a transparent manner. The perspective aim that underlines the way protocols are drawn is data security and better accessibility of the data. The employees' representatives are briefed about the developments which are taking place with regard to the modules during the meetings which are called information sharing sessions. The data pertaining to employees' salary records, employee benefits, etc. are captured and maintained by the establishment department by employees working in the department. Surveillance on employee work output, performance assessment is not done. Separate procedure is there for that purpose, which is not dependent on the system output surveillance. LIC is treated as an essential service by the central government. Hence, we were going to offices even during the COVID lockdown period. But will restriction on the number of employees to attend office to maintain the physical distancing as per government orders. Work from home is not full-fledged in LIC as we deal with the policyholders. Premium collection is to be done, documents to be collected from policyholders for settlement of claims, loans, etc., which cannot be done in work from home mode of work. However, we are trying to do some back-end jobs which are very basis and still evolving. The data governance system in LIC definitely promotes public interest. And as the data is collected, stored, managed, and accessed by the employees of LIC only, and not by any outsider or a multinational corporation. Even the software needed to manage this huge data is developed by the employees only in centers which are called software development centers in which the employees are working. This leads to better service to policyholders and also takes care of their interest. Hence, very low or negligible amount of attrition is there of the employees. If one employee goes on promotion or transfer, another employee is trained and he is replaced. Hence, there is no dependency on anybody, and there is a huge amount of transparency and confidence. The worker's interest is also promoted, taken care of, as the data is captured and maintained by the employees only with workers' involvement. And also transparency is there and no surveillance issues are there till now. Data is being collected, used by workers, software being developed by workers, and safety of the data collected is ensured in a transparent way. We strongly believe that our data is our property, and collecting, managing, using the data in the interest of the policyholders is the right way to do it. We often think that there is no other model than data being a private property of the company that collects it. The LIC experience reiterates the same. Fair digital transition is the key. People's money for people's welfare, policyholders' data for their welfare, employees' data for their safety and welfare being maintained in a transparent way. This is how LIC is functioning. Susana, I have time, or can I take questions now?
You have 2 more minutes if you want, or we could go with questions, as you decide.
I would like to make 1 or 2 points.
Sure.
Generally, the digital technology in public services is driven by private corporate interest. We have successfully overcome that, defeated that. Corporate-led digitalization is generally associated with major data privacy abuse, resulting in worsening public service and quality and efficiency of the service. We have overcome that also. Generally, cost-cutting driven digitalization tends to replace and reduce or cuts, it leads to cuts in jobs, increases worker surveillance and performance monitoring, increases working time and extends job tasks. This also we have successfully overcome through the transparency and collective participation and ownership of the data. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Narasimhan. I think that was very interesting to get an understanding of, some level of alternative perspective on how data can be managed. And as you mentioned, the interest of LIC to create its own capacity in terms of the workers, its own infrastructure, its own systems. It would be interesting to dig a bit more into cloud computing, considering that very often cloud computing means that servers are not in the country. So that would be, for instance, something that I would be interested to know more about. I think it's very important how you mentioned that the way the management has worked with workers to develop digitalization that makes that workers are confident that this is not a tool against them, but it's a tool for them to do their work in a better way. So these are very interesting elements, and maybe also something that for me would be interesting to know is what do you think would happen with the investment, considering that that's something that the government has on its mind for the LIC. But I would like to open now for discussion. If we can have Shubham, are you? Okay. So opening it for discussion, if you can either unmute and speak directly or put your hand up if you want to ask any questions to Narasimhan or make any interventions. Please go ahead.
I'd like to ask a question. I can't seem to put my hand up because I'm a co-host.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Narasimhan. My question is about if LIC has managed to quantify the cost savings that you've sort of made by not outsourcing, by building your own capacities. Because I remember one of the points that Jammu Anand highlighted in his intervention last week was that how urban local bodies are paying out huge sums of money to private corporations to manage data, be it in water, be it in sanitation, be it in other levels of urban governance. And you have a case that points to the contrary, that you can actually do it in-house and you can, but I think it'll be good to put out this information in terms of how LIC has done that. Is there some study that you can point us to that can be further publicized to show that the public sector has capacity and it can lead to huge cost savings and efficiency and, like you said, sort of workers and consumer welfare?
Thank you, Benny. Do we have anyone else who would like to intervene or ask further questions? Okay. I think Narasimhan, if you want to go ahead with
Yes,
the question that Benny raised and the ones I raised too.
yes. It is very interesting for you to know that LIC has pursued digitalization in-house, not for saving, cutting cost. Because LIC is having huge funds. We are funding many of the government projects. We are having shares in many private and public sector companies also. This digitalization in-house capacity building was done to protect our data, to ensure that we have control on our data. Money is not an issue. And you will be surprised to know, Susana, the cloud computing is there, but the data is not only in the country, it is within LIC, managed by LIC only. And we don't even use what you call Microsoft software. We don't use that. We don't use any multinational corporation software in LIC. We use only our IT for change. The person, what is his name? He uses the software, Linux. We use that. So it is open. We create our own software. Nobody has access to our software. Nobody has access to our data. And cost cutting, actually cost cutting is not an issue. We use it as per our convenience and to protect our secrecy, ensure that our data is with us only and nobody else gets a hand on it. Even workers' data, we have total control on that. We negotiate with the management and how this data can be used and for what purpose it has to be used and for what purpose it should not be used. We negotiate, sit with them, and accordingly it is done. Surveillance is out of question. As of date, no zero surveillance.
That's very interesting. Nandini would like to also ask a question.
Yes.
So I'm going to give her the opportunity. Nandini, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the very, interesting and very evocative presentation, Mr. Narasimhan. So my question is this. I understand that for the digitization of the data resources itself and maintaining the internal data records of the corporation, LIC did not go outside and everything was done in-house. But what happens when, there are all these proposals in many public service agencies to build different types of services, or let's say AI based like predictive analytics around insurance models and all that? Are all these capacities present within the corporation, and many a time one may need to go out and look for contracts? Like, what is the thinking around that? Because this is happening in the health sector, where the data itself is being digitized and then made available as as a public resource, like we can see in the national digital health ecosystem. But the government is going to, like, open this up and bid for AI developers, and then there is a particular risk of private capture of the value of public data. So what is your thinking about the future of what LIC has done and how this will go?
And Narasimhan, also, if you could give us a sense of, with the government putting LIC as one of the companies that will be de-invested, so would that mean that the control over the data will then be, open to the other investors? Would that be one of the impacts also? So if you could respond to these two, and is there anyone else who would like to intervene or raise a question? Okay. I don't see any further hands, so if you could go ahead with these two questions.
Yes. Nandini, it was a very nice question. I would like to tell you, LIC believes in human intelligence than artificial intelligence. I will tell you an example. I am myself a system administrator in LIC. I manage the data. I am working as system administrator since maybe last 29 years. So we are trained to do that. And big companies coming and intervening, no. We have some what you call specific requirements for insurance. Unlike general health, actuarial intelligence is needed, and actuarial intelligence comes with knowledge and experience, not with machine intervention, because it is huge risk is involved in this, and we can't depend on a machine or somebody on whom we do not have trust. So the best we thought was our employees, because we have utmost good faith in continuation of this organization and to do better service. And the slogan with which LIC came into existence was to spread the gospel of insurance to every nook and corner of the country. LIC is the only corporation which concentrates on small policies in rural villages also. And we are having the quantity, the number of policy holders, it is more than the population of many countries. And still, the data is in public domain, that is within the public sector control, and the employees are fully vigilant and take care of the interest of the company and interest of the policyholders and the citizens. And we have never felt that the intelligence of our employees is anyway less than the corporate employees. In fact, we have many times our chairman and our managing directors have said that it is the commitment of the employees only which is ensuring that LIC is still the leader of the insurance market, not only in India, but throughout the world in many areas, like claim settlement. In claim settlement, LIC is #1 in the world. So this is how we go about it. And when I come to Susana's question, data, when the disinvestment takes place, how the data will be. So as of date, we have ensured that this doesn't go into private hands. And future also, we'll be vigilant. We'll be taking up the matter with the management and the government to ensure that basically we don't want disinvestment to happen. We are fighting against disinvestment. But if disinvestment happens, then definitely we will fight for data to be in the control of LIC only. And it should the finance minister has also made it clear that the sovereign guarantee of LIC will continue. That is the government assurance that it is the owner that will continue, and the administration will be in the hands of LIC only, even after disinvestment. So we'll definitely it can change in future also, but we'll be vigilant, and we'll always be campaigning to ensure that the people's welfare and the workers' welfare is taken care of. Thank you. Hello?
Sorry, everyone. I think Susanna dropped out for a moment. She will be back in a second.
Yeah, yeah. So in the meantime, if anybody wants to ask anything, you're
I'm
welcome.
sorry. That was a little technical glitch. My
Yeah,
internet seems to be unstable.
yeah.
Okay.
So that's it,
So
Susanna.
thanks a lot. I think it's very new, I think, for many people. And as Benny asked for any information that is available, if it's not available, maybe we will have to help create it. Yeah, that's probably one of the things that come out from this. And I would like to now then continue and ask Nandini Chami from IT for Change for her intervention. Um, Nandini will intervene on the question of how can we conceptualize data governance for workers' data rights and make reflections in the Indian context. So, Nandini, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Susanna. I just want to address the question of when we are looking at data governance, what are the intersections with workers' rights and the traditional debates that we have all had in this domain for a long time? And I think that there are primarily two challenges that come to mind. So, the first is about the intensification of workplace surveillance. And this is a problem not only because of the privacy and personal data protection considerations, but also because it changes the way in which tracking and workplace monitoring and the existing imbalance of power in the employer employee relationship is intensified. And in the COVID moment, what we are seeing is that public safety is becoming the new decoy or the fait accompli for utilizing or introducing or justifying many of these unaccountable workplace surveillance technologies, right from gig work to all sectors. To give you a few examples, during the pandemic, we all saw Zomato and Swiggy justifying that temperature readings and employee names of those who prepared the food and delivered the food, they were furnished to customers of online food delivery chains as a matter of routine. And very perversely, Zomato even used or quoted WHO guidelines to justify this kind of like incursion. The second thing is when people switch to remote work in traditional or typical service sector jobs, we see the rise of apps like Time Doctor that actually your employer forces you to install on your machine. And this app monitors the worker logged hours, the tabs that are open on the browser, screenshots that will automatically activate camera to check how much of attention you are paying, when are you getting distracted, etc. And we saw even leading educational services company using these apps to track their workforce during the lockdown. And the other thing that we are seeing, and this pertains to an issue that Benny had raised in his summary from the last session at the start of today's session, where in Smart Cities initiative, those types of worker surveillance initiatives that worker unions had managed to successfully challenge, they are coming back now. And I will give you the example of Chandigarh, where under the smart cities, it has introduced this GPS watcher system on all its sanitation workers for tracking their work efficiency. So the watches actually provide data on how many hours somebody is clocking in, how many breaks they take, and the number of work orders that they are responding to. If a worker takes off the watch in between the shift, they are actually penalized, and there is no right to appeal about the decisions made on the basis of this database tracking. There is no practical mechanism by which workers can audit their own records. So basically it becomes an ununderstandable and the opaque system through which employers are tracking the employees. So actually the workers of Panchkula Municipal Corporation, where this had been introduced in Chhattisgarh, they had protested, and the municipal corporation had even promised to roll back or discontinue the use of trackers. But then after the pandemic, what's happening is many of the workers are also left without options, and the municipal corporation reintroduced this because they were actually saying that we will fire the workers who do not wear it. And then the union was talking about how difficult it has become to challenge or mount a protest in this, because this is being naturalized and it's coming back. And why workplace data valence is extremely important to challenge is because of the reasons that Uniglobal Union has pointed out in its Charter of Worker Data Rights, where it's very important that whenever employees' personal data are collected and processed, it must be processed on a lawful, fair, and transparent processing, and there must be a clear purpose limitation, and there must be data minimization, that only those personal data are collected that are strictly necessary to achieve the purpose of legitimate monitoring as part of the working relationship. And clearly, if there is a remote tracker that is installed on your laptop and it's seeing everything you are browsing, etc., this clearly violates data minimization principle, for instance. And having said that, in India, we are in a really tough place with respect to this, because we do not have a personal data protection law that is in effect. And in the existing law, we actually do not have a very strong duty on the employer to protect workers' data rights. And the existing provision in the bill as it stands today, it doesn't cover many class of temporary workers like platform workers and other things, for instance. And it's also important that, unlike in Europe, in India, we do not have a right to audit or a very clear right to explanation that our personal data protection bill currently allows. So this means that tomorrow, if in Parliament, the personal data protection bill in the current form is enacted, there will actually be no recourse for unaccountable data valence. And this is coming in all sectors, and this is a very serious concern. Now, coming to the second challenge, I want to say that this is about workers' economic rights and workers' right to share in the data value that is being generated in many sectors. As all the speakers before me have said, today data is the most critical economic resource of the economy. And as UNCTAD has pointed out, there is a double structural transformation that is happening today in all economies, right? So just like we are all familiar with how more and more services work will happen because economies transition from agriculture, manufacturing, and services, we see another movement where all these three critical economic domains are being restructured by lead firms, digital corporations, who are actually using the power of data and digital intelligence to orchestrate economic resources effectively. And what happens when value chains are restructured through data? We notice that more and more value is able to be generated with minuscule employee bases as firms modularize and outsource operations. As there is a famous statistic by The Economist, which is a neoliberal magazine, but even The Economist admits that at the height of, let's say, the industrial revolution, the car manufacturing type of capitalist model, the amount of employees that were there to generate the market value, hardly a fraction of that is available today, like when it comes to Silicon Valley model, right? So Silicon Valley companies are probably generating around $247 billion of revenue with hardly 137,000 employees, a fraction of what car manufacturers in Detroit had at the peak of the manufacturing boom. So we also notice that labor markets are getting polarized, where more and more, when you have new service work models, there is an entire gigification of the economy, and there is a reserve army of temporary workers that platforms are able to mobilize and demobilize at will. To give you an example, like Uber or Urban Clap, or as we are seeing now, even in traditional services like education and health, there is a rise of this platform service model. And one thing that is common to everything in the emerging data value chain is that the data of workers is integral to the business model of these companies, just like the data of customers and other economic actors is essential. And what facilitates this data capture is that today we do not have any clear framework for data ownership, right? Like there is no rationale about who can claim ownership or rights over data that is generated. So when big tech companies come and generate data from different transactions, by default, they are able to enclose data. Like, for example, take the case of Uber. A worker is not just driving for Uber, but when he logs on the app, what the machine observes about him, what he is actually entering into the machine, and his own, like, profile that is generated by Uber, all these contribute to the business model that enables Uber to optimize traffic. Similarly, for Amazon, the medium and small enterprise data is essential to the way Amazon is able to optimize the retail chain and control it end to end. So I would like to submit here that it might be good for us right now to think of what would be a way for us to stake workers' claim in data, an economic claim in the collective value of data and intelligence that is generated. And we should be thinking of workers at all levels and even small economic actors like farmers, for instance. And one of the things I would like to talk about later, if we have time, is about some specific models that a few cooperatives and like a few theoreticians have proposed to harness or leverage the collective value of data in ways that work for workers. And I would like to make one final point before I close. That when we think of public services today, public services are one of the most valuable repositories of like data, right? Because they have these historical records, and there is this entire business model that is lying untapped in the eyes of the big tech company. So whether we look at urban services, like there is this famous case of Google and its project to build a smart city in Toronto, or the UK National Health Service, where there have been reams and reams of like, public private partnerships that have been built around its valuable data resources. Public services are something that all big tech companies are eyeing, like what Mr. Narasimhan had also mentioned in his presentation. And so today there is like this huge challenge before us where when we are using data from public services, how do we build models that work for citizens, for the workers in these public services, and they don't end up being models that alienate citizens' rights and alienate like workers' interests as well. Like, for example, in National Health Service of the UK government is inviting big tech companies to come and build data solutions that will actually help them reduce the number of doctors they employ, right? This is not the kind of thing one wants to build. We want data and AI based solutions that will intensify public investments and care infrastructure investments and strengthen public services. And public service workers should have a say in what happens to the data value and how it is used for public interest. So these are some of the models we should be thinking about. And in India, the conversation that is currently happening around the governance of non personal data and building community data trust clearly gives us an opening to do this. And I would also like to talk about this later if there is time. Thank you.
So Nandini, you have a few more minutes. So if you would like to continue and talk about this, then we can take the questions afterwards.
Okay, how much time do I have?
2 3 minutes.
Okay. So I would like to talk about, the models of data trust or alternative ways in which we can leverage the power of data to make them work for workers and small economic actors. I would like to mention the experiments that Seva Cooperative Federation is trying out, where with women farmers and with women workers, they are actually trying to build cooperative platform models where they are trying to create platforms that are owned by cooperative enterprises, where the entire data that is generated will be managed by the worker cooperatives, and those kinds of data analytics that are generated will only be used for enhancing the gains or incomes or business prospects of their constituencies. And one of the center pieces or hallmark of these models is that there is no intrusive data vigilance. For example, in the women domestic workers related cooperative app that Seva is trying to build to connect domestic workers to their clients or potential clients, it's very clear that there will be no rating systems that will discriminate against the worker and which will promote an opaqueness that is in favor of the employer. That is how conventional domestic worker client matching platforms are designed, and Seva will challenge this in its model. Both these models that I'm speaking about are still not up, they are still under development. And this is one of the other challenges that all initiatives that try to build alternative models which will leverage data for workers face, which is the point that they will not have the capital and the resources and the investments to go through the necessary incubation time that a platform model like demands. We all know how Amazon, for instance, went through 20 years of losses before it made profits, right? So if you are making an alternative, how can you compete with an Uber out there? For example, if you are like, a set of like taxi drivers like who have your own cooperative and are trying to make a business case, if you try to make your own platform cooperative, is it realistic that with something like Ola and Uber, where their entire model is about for years and years they can cash burn and they can continue to sustain on venture capital without making any profit, but by that time you would have been wiped out as a workers cooperative trying to make an alternative platform data model. Now these are some of the concerns about how would you actually incubate and sustain and compete with them in this market. And it also brings me to the point that we may need structural interventions where we recognize in law that sometimes a corporation's data resources is a source of antitrust or anti-competitive advantage, and beyond a certain threshold, maybe corporations have to be broken up or the data resources have to come back to a common pool, and there must be open licensing of those data sets. Like for example, the European Union is trying to think about certain laws in this regard to promote mandatory data sharing by big tech companies so that the incumbents don't always gain, but other people and smaller business actors and workers models also stand a chance. The other question is, right now we don't have any clear rationale or logic by which we can assert workers rights or citizen rights over the data resources that are already kind of like captured or closed or colonized by data companies. And here I would like to talk about a small framework that the Digital Justice Manifesto of the JustNet Coalition has pointed out.
Just getting a feedback that you're speaking very fast. So if you
Okay.
can just slow down and
Okay.
come
Yeah.
towards the closing.
Yes. So this is a point that, the Digital Justice Manifesto of the JustNet Coalition has pointed out about how to change the idea of like data rights, right? So typically we look at data rights only as freedom from data violence or negative rights that workers have. But we should also be able to talk about a positive right or workers' rights, economic claims in data. And this is something I would like to place on the table, that specific economic groups that make market contributions to and are key subjects of data in a particular sector or an intelligent system, such as drivers on a taxi platform, traders on an e-commerce platform, farmers on an agri platform, or workers in data producing jobs, must have primary economic rights, individual and collective, over the data they contribute. Such data constitutes the main value of the corresponding platform or intelligent system. Data creating actors on a platform therefore have the right to participate in the governance of that platform, for example, through adequate representation on the governing board. Alternatively, they may choose to pool their data to develop platform cooperatives, or a public or non-profit agency could help them to so organize. I would also like to extend this argument to talk about how, in terms of public services, we must imagine the creation of data trusts that have members from multiple constituencies. Like, for instance, in the health sector, having a data trust where the workers of the public health service system and the patients to whom the data belongs to and other actors are all part of the decisions about how the data resources are going to be governed, because only then can we ensure that data is retained as a public good and it will be used in public interest and it's not going to be co-opted through big tech partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nandini. You really covered a lot of ground. I think your example of the Panchkula municipal corporations was, I think, very telling of what is going on, and some of the kind of maybe principles that you highlighted in terms of what workers can look at. Some, for instance, minimize the kind of data that is collected, look at the data not being intrusive, um, ensuring that there is no opacity that is in the favor of management. I think these kind of principles are very useful for us to kind of think this further. And I think also when you mentioned the possibility of data governance by workers and the limitations of community only of, like uh, uh, category of worker only owning that data, that is a limitation, and maybe therefore there is also an opportunity in workers that are part of institutions, like a municipality where or an institution like the LIC, where therefore there is an institution that has more capacity to try to develop those alternative models, and many of the affiliates of PSI work in that kind of setup. So that's also very interesting for us to think about. So I would like to again open it for comments and questions from the floor. If you have any question, you can um, unmute and speak. Yes, we have Narasimhan. Please go ahead, Narasimhan.
Nandini, you have said that some apps are there which are to be downloaded and they take care of workers' data surveillance or how they are seeing, whether they are concentrating or not, all these things. Whether this is legally permissible, can it not be questioned legally? Will it not intrude into the what you call privacy of the individual?
Okay, this is our first question. I'm just going to check if we have any more questions before I invite Nandini to respond. Don't be shy. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Maybe Nandini, you can go ahead with this one.
Yeah, I also have a question in private chat in addition to Mr. Narasimhan's question, so I will respond to both the questions. So yes, thank you for that, Mr. Narasimhan. Yes, one of the problems is that the apps that I was talking about, where companies force you to install this, and this of course goes against what is permissible even within the constitutional right to privacy and what the Puttaswamy judgment will talk about. But usually these are the remote freelancers or workers with hardly any bargaining power and hardly any union force behind them, right? So that makes it very difficult to say no. And the second problem is in these types of arrangements that are becoming more and more common as platforms enter more and more all these typical white collar like service work areas, and they become converted into fixed term employment contracts. There is a very big problem because we have a legal lacuna since we don't have a personal data protection law, right? There is a bill and that bill has not been passed by parliament. So what is like the actionable route through which you're going to challenge this? So I agree with you, but these are the two reasons it becomes complicated. So in the private chat box, I also had a question about, asking me to discuss a little more about domestic workers in India and what are the initiatives that are there. So I was actually speaking about an initiative where Seva Cooperative is trying to bring together women domestic workers in a couple of cities in Gujarat and trying to build a model where they can connect to different clients or potential potential employers and be enabled to bargain for fair wages and for better terms of work and all these things. What I was trying to say was that there are mainstream models in the space like Book My Buy, which actually work in ways where they privilege the employer's needs and like interests and all the consumer preferences over workers' rights at every point. So there is absolutely no complaint mechanism or grievance redress, or what happens, how does the worker know they are going to a home that is safe? So these things are not taken care of by the platform, right? So what Seva is trying to do is to make a dent or try to carve out something alternative in a market where mainstream platforms typically do not take care of gig workers' interests. So this was the point I was making.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, and that also gives us some idea of what are the asks that workers can have then, even for mainstream platforms. And was, I think you mentioned it very well, right? Have a system for redressal, have a system for ensuring safety of the workers, checking on the people who are asking them to give their services. So again, I think trying to point out some concrete things that we can collect. So this is very useful. If we don't have any more questions for Nandini, then I would like to go to our third speaker, who is Jai. And Jai is going to speak about digital trade agreements and the policy space for data governance, and why should unions care about it. So I invite Zai to start her presentation. You have 12 minutes. Thank you, Zai.
Thanks, Susanna. I'll just start by explaining what
Your sound, there is a, yeah,
is
there
it.
is a disturbance on your side.
Okay, I'm going to try without the earphone then. Is it better now?
Yes, it might be that you need to speak close to your computer so that the sound is clear.
I hope this is good.
It
And
sounds good, and also there is interpretation, so please remember not to speak too fast. Thanks.
so I'll just start by explaining what digital trade agreements are, and then what provisions they contain, and how these provisions affect public sector workers or workers in general. Um, So a free trade agreement is an agreement among two or more countries to trade in a certain way. So it puts restrictions for the large part on governments on the actions they can take. So it specifies what the government cannot do in relation to business, both domestic business and international business. So these are legal limits. If your government violates them after signing the agreement, your government is doing something illegal. So governments don't usually violate them. Even if you do a people's movement against something, if that thing is illegal under a trade agreement, your government cannot do it. So you, they have to withdraw from that trade agreement in order to legally listen to your demands if they're part of this agreement. That's why they're very important. The World Trade Organization, which includes most countries in the world, is a forum where some of these trade deals are signed, and then there you have regional trade deals also, like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership or RCEP, and you have some bilateral trade deals also, which are between two countries. So what's happening recently among these trade deals is that they have started to include chapters on e-commerce. And what these chapters really contain are rules for digital trade in general. So they will contain provisions such as there must be free flow of data. What this means is that it is illegal for your government to ask a company to store data within that company, within your own country, sorry. So the government of India cannot tell Google to store Indian people's data or data generated in India in India. So Google can just say that this is illegal and can store it wherever it wants. And when the data is not stored in your country, it's very difficult to regulate anything about that data because you cannot physically access it. The servers are not in your country. Um, and so the problem with this is that if you even make provisions like Nandini was explaining for sharing of data, if you make it mandatory for Google to share data, you cannot implement that regulation if that data is not even in your country. You physically cannot unless Google decides that it will comply with your regulation. You can just choose to not comply. So when you cannot access the data, you cannot build public alternatives as well to large multinational companies because their power is based on the data that they have accumulated over so many years. So when you cannot build public alternatives, you cannot have that many jobs in the public sector as well. So especially for something at the city level, where cities would like to do certain public works and a lot of data that would help to do this work is available only with foreign multinational technology companies. It puts the city at a disadvantage when it cannot access this data at all. So another thing that these agreements do is that they make it illegal for your government to ask for access to source codes, which is uh, the code or the software that determines how a lot of these programs run, right? And when a lot of work is now becoming so precarious and risky, when a lot of pay is determined through algorithms, when your working conditions or if you're subjected to so much surveillance that they're checking your keystrokes, etc. If that is being determined through software, where how many hours you have worked, how hard you have worked, therefore how much money you should earn. If it is being said that you don't even have the right to check that software, whether it's working correctly, whether it's working fairly, um, this is what this agreement is saying. It's a violation of your right as a worker to know how your working conditions and your pay are being determined, even through the most minimum level of privacy. And we know that LIC has its own, homegrown, in-house sort of software to do these things, but a lot of companies don't. A lot of companies enter into public-private partnerships, and these agreements just remove their ability to negotiate on this point, on saying that uh, you must store the data here, or we must have access to source codes, because you cannot negotiate through the state essentially, because the state is not allowed to require anything. So the rule of law cannot function in the workers' interests because these things are already made illegal under these agreements. Um, when you close off access to source codes, you also close off the access to technology transfer. So a lot of alternatives that were built to large private companies were actually built through technology transfer. And often such transfer of technology is a condition on which you allow private foreign companies to function in your country, so that you can also build alternatives, you can also learn from them in exchange for providing them with a market. But such agreements close off that option, and so they provide an impetus to privatization, to the public sector not being able to catch up because it's not able to access that source code. And that's why these agreements are so dangerous. They're dangerous for reasons that they enable surveillance of workers but don't give workers any power over the data that is generated through that surveillance to fight their own cases based on that data. And they reduce the space to make public alternatives to these large and powerful technology companies, which reduces the opportunity for employment in public services as well. And they reduce our ability to use the state or the government as a tool to regulate large technology companies. I think that's about it. I can speak later, maybe in the questions or in closing remarks.
Thanks a lot, Zai. I think it's very important how you explain that the kind of governance of data that we need as part of a broader governance of the digital economy is being discussed in what are called trade agreements, clearly a misnomer, but with an intention to give power to corporations and allow them to go with the kind of private access to data and privatization of data that they're interested in, and therefore cutting the space for the kind of alternatives that we discussed today. So thank you for that. I'm going to then reopen it for discussion. Do I have any hands up? Anyone who would like to either intervene? Prakash, we haven't heard you today. Do we have Prakash with us?
See, yeah, I am there, but since morning I'm doing 3 webinars, and again I got 6 at 6.
Oh.
I think it's going on very good. There is no problem. Taking, I think, let others intervene, ask questions and all. This presentation is very good. I am hearing everything. I don't think that I am keeping away, but I'm hearing everything, and it's good going on. Okay.
Thanks,
Anybody
Prakash.
wanted to ask? There are many people who they don't. Why don't they participate? We should make them to participate now. We will have 30, 35, 28 people are there.
So we do have many people, and to remind that.
Yeah.
Thanks, Prakash.
All participants should ask some questions on this. Digitalization is very, very important, because what Narasimhan has said is rightly. He has got his own experience, and that experience is very relevant for this subject matter. Of course, I do not have any question on this, but I am hearing on the issue.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Before we have a question from Narasimhan and a question from Benny. So I will start with Narasimhan.
Yes. I would like
Please
to
go
say the last recession, the Great Recession, India was the least affected because of strong public sector financial institutions. And data is very important for continuing that. As far as LIC is concerned, again, I would like to say, apart from our regular business and employee data, pension is a very big issue now, pension data. Because the multinationals are viewing pension as a very gold mine of data. I would like to say LIC is one of the fund managers for this new pension scheme. There are 2 types of pensions. One is old pension scheme, another is new pension scheme, or it is called the national pension system. In LIC, the employees who have been appointed after 2010 are covered under the NPS. So LIC, being the fund manager, for running this new pension scheme, you should have signed an MOU with Pension Fund and Regulatory and Development Authority, PFRDA. It is compulsory. And we are the only union which has filed an RTI with LIC management asking them whether they have signed an MOU with PFRDA. They said no. Then we said, if we are one of the fund managers for the country for pension, new pension scheme, why we should not run the employee scheme ourselves? Why we should have an MOU with PFRDA? To this effect, the matter was taken up with the government of India, and LIC employees new pension scheme is also run by LIC, and that data is also with us. We have total control on that data also. Just I wanted to share this information with you because trade is not regulated to business only. Trade is now going beyond that, looking into privacy issues, and trade is affecting the lives and livelihood of the people in every way. Hence, nobody should think that trade is not my subject and why I should be interested. Trade is very important and it affects every aspect of the workers' of official and personal and future savings also. So this is very important, and I just wanted to put this view rather than asking a question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Narasimhan. And yes, we are very happy if people also want to intervene to put forward a perspective. It doesn't have to be a question. We have Benny, and also to remind that we have interpretation. So if you want to ask a question in Hindi, in Marathi, in Tamil, that's also completely possible. So feel free to intervene in the language that you're most comfortable in. Benny, you had a question?
Yes, I initially had a question, but I think I'll sort of revise it to just making a broad comment, trying to link up all the three presentations. And taking on from the last point that Zai made about how trade agreements reduce the policy space for public alternatives and public interest regulations, which is what I think we need to urgently do as economies rapidly sort of digitize. So the point that Narasimhan made was, here's a public sector company that is trying to evolve its own systems that are worker-friendly, consumer-friendly, and advance the public interest. And then Nandini spoke about how cooperatives are trying to get a space within this, emerging sort of platform economy space. But I think the important thing is for both the LIC and for cooperatives to thrive, we need to be able to overcome the structural sort of challenges, right? For cooperatives, and she articulated that they need to get access to finance, and it's not just finance, they also need industrial policy tools. They need to get preferential treatment. You need to have regulations on work conditions of platform employees, minimum wages. And linking it up to the point that Zai made, that if India makes these far-reaching binding commitments through FTAs or trade agreements, we lose all of that policy space. So for instance, if LIC needs to create its own systems, we need to ensure that India does not sign a government procurement agreement in the WTO. If India signs a government procurement agreement, if LIC is trying to do its own sort of, in-house procurement of IT, etc., a foreign firm can say that, that should be open up to, open bidding. The point is that LIC will not be able to specialize in all aspects of the digitization challenge. And like, Nandini said, AI, maybe they might want to give it to a domestic arm of the Indian government that is maybe invested in artificial intelligence. But what will happen if you've signed up a trade agreement is that AI contract will have to be opened up for any global player to bid for. And therefore LIC cannot, governments can't privilege either their own actors or domestic private actors. So I think on all of these positive elements that we heard from LIC and possible avenues for creating platform cooperatives, it's very important for the government to step in and support cooperatives and support LIC. And I think the trade agreement space will close all of these opportunities for posterity for India. And which is why it's very important for us to be campaigning against any possible e-commerce or digital chapters in trade agreements.
Thank you very much, Vinny. And I think you expanded the discussion on, the dangers of the trade agreement to even one more tool that is there, the government procurement agreements. And as many people know here, despite that they are called trade agreements, free trade agreements cover a broad range of issues from import duties to government procurement to the digital economy and data related regulation to foreign direct investment to services. It's really encompassing, and in many locations, the aim is to constrain the government's ability to regulate private players and foreign players, and through that also limiting the policies and the policy space for industrial development, but even for provision of services in the public interest. So these are really a lot of the challenges we face. Narasimhan, did you want to make a further comment? Great, okay. So,
Very small comment. I would like to say that I totally agree with Benny on whatever he has said, and I would like to inform that the government of India is taking steps for listing LIC disinvestment, listing LIC shares in foreign stock exchanges also, outside the country also, because they think that the huge disinvestment, that funds may not be there in the country for people to invest or purchase, so they are going to list it abroad also, hence our concerns are increasing. Thank you.
thank you so much for this. And maybe I'm just going to move the discussion back to Nandini, who also has a comment. But I just wanted to ask Nandini to also maybe if you could speak a bit more about what is happening at the level of policy around data governance in India. So we spoke about the challenges of where spaces are possibly going to be reduced through trade agreements. But can you give us a bit more? You started talking about it, but maybe develop a bit more about what is there already, what is in the pipeline, what is it that we would actually need in terms of maybe policies and laws around data governance, and also, of course, comments you wanted to make.
Yeah, so I actually wanted to comment on this aspect only. So that's a coincidence. Yeah. So I think that there are two aspects of data governance policy developments that we should be attuned to. And the first is extremely important for those of us working in the public sector, public services especially. So recently, earlier this year, the government has come out with plans for making what it calls national open digital ecosystems. So, this is the idea that, and this relates to the question on cloud infrastructure that you were asking, Susanna, at the start of the meeting. You had raised this point. So, in every sector, there seems to be the idea that data will be the critical source of value, right? And then different packets of data, if they are lying around in a scattered way or in a way where one cannot generate intelligence out of it, it is seen as that's not like, really beneficial. So we need something where there will be a cloud infrastructure, data storage, data warehousing, where for particular public agencies in different sectors, whether agriculture or health or urban transportation, the government will put the financial investment to create these systems so that India can go into the digital revolution. That's the kind of thinking the government has. On the surface of it, this is a great idea because, yes, this seems to be very appropriate because the wealth of public services data should be owned by no one other than government, and the investment has to happen with government, and public agencies have to partner, and we have to encourage even private parties and maybe even mandate them through mandatory data sharing rules like Zai was also referring to in the end. So all this seems great. But then there is one question which the open digital ecosystem thinking, and even as can be seen in the National Digital Health Infrastructure Blueprint that the government has issued now, which is a particular case of open digital ecosystem it's making in the health sector, there is one very problematic silence. once we build all this, like, data infrastructure, and we have got everything into a data commons, what are the rules of access? Who can access, use, and build intelligence on top of this? And if this is undefined, there is a very real danger that private companies, big tech companies, foreign multinationals come and use this data, and then they will lock up their artificial intelligence products and the bulk of the value that comes out of this, right? So how do you govern public private partnerships that will happen? There is a very big hole here, and we should actually start thinking about it. And there is also the question of what partnerships should be permitted and not permitted. Like, for example, the Chandigarh city example I mentioned earlier, there must be a rule that in a data commons around a smart city, such kind of a partnership should not be permitted, right? Like, what you can do, what kind of like case use cases you cannot build on top of public data. There needs to be greater thinking around this, and this is something we should all engage with. The second point is that we are all familiar with the personal data protection bill and its problems, but there is one small point I would like to highlight, that in its current form, the Indian bill does not have a right to explanation. And this will become a very big problem, because it means workers will find it very difficult to go and scrutinize, practices of workplace tracking, or to demand, like, algorithms being opened up. And this is one area we really have to be like careful, and we really have to fight for. And the third and final point actually is that the government is right now thinking about a framework for the governance of non personal data. Now, what does this mean? We are all aware of this idea that when we work on platforms and we engage, and through our behavior, we are producing data footprints. We are all familiar with the idea of personal data. But there are also many forms of data footprints that are there in the world, which are not directly traceable back to a particular individual, right? Like, for instance, meteorological data or urban transportation, just like traffic patterns and things like this. So who governs this mass of data, and who has the right to enjoy the benefits of products built on top of this, right? So there is a thinking now that we have to have these ideas that around each of these data sets, there are communities of interest that are there, right? Like, if you're looking at data from the neighborhood of Jayanagar for a Bangalore smart city project, then the neighborhood of Bangalore and the citizens of Bangalore have a claim in that data of, like, whatever is collected around about that neighborhood and what is built on top of it. Sometimes these communities will be interest based. Like, for instance, in the entire set of intelligence that Uber has about, like, transportation patterns, workers have a claim, right? And workers have a claim not just in the data they input or to their individual data profile that Uber has about them, but also a fair share in the benefits of, like, this entire value that Uber is generating through its business case, right? So this is the kind of thinking that the non-personal data thinking in India, where there is a committee, and the committee has come out with an expert report where some kind of attempt has been made to create a claims framework for non-personal data. So this is something we have to watch out for, because this is not a policy yet or something, but there are these promising openings which we can think about and form data trusts or ways of, like, working. This is something that we should be tracking.
Thank you so much, Nandini. Yeah, so we have, I think, through the discussion, heard of different language or principles that workers can try to integrate into collective bargaining frameworks at the workplace. And there is also this other language and demands that come more into what are broader data policies. That might be national or at a lower level. And I think public services workers can identify with, being workers at some points, but sometimes being users or sometimes being part of a community. And these are probably the different set of actors that need to be brought together in different combinations. Do we have more comments? Any more interventions from the floor? So I would like then to ask our three speakers for some ideas of some recommendations for a kind of way forward, or important things that as unions we should either keep in mind or ask for ways that we could intervene. So yes, what would be, what you think would be important directions in which we should take this discussion forward. So I would like to ask the three speakers maybe to respond to this, starting with Narasimhan.
Yes. I would like to say the need of the hour with relation to the issue on which I have talked. Need of the hour is to establish an adequate framework for introduction and use of digital technology in public services. Such regulation must be developed in close dialogue with workers and trade unions through meaningful participation, information, and consultation, and by negotiating relevant wording in collective agreements. This can be a very good way forward. It will take care of the workers' interest and the interest of the citizens' data also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Narasimhan. I'll continue with Nandini.
Yeah. So I just have 2 points to make. I think adding on to what Mr. Narasimhan said, the fact of public data infrastructure investments and how to govern public data infrastructure, this has to become a very critical advocacy agenda for public service unions. That is what I think. And the second issue is that workers' data rights are actually becoming the new frontier of the labor movement in this like digital age that we are living in, and public service union must also join the larger struggle for workers data rights, and connecting with groups that are looking at both moves against data valence, but also groups that are trying to establish claims in data as a source of value and trying to build alternative worker owned production models, because that old question of the workers movement that returns in the digital epoch. Like, if data is the source of value, how can workers reclaim it? How can workers build business models around it to claim data value and build equal business models? So these are the two things I think are important priorities.
Thank you very much for this, Nandini. Zai?
Thanks. I think I have a somewhat similar point, which is to build the capacity to use data, not only among our public sector undertakings, but also among the unions of these public sector undertakings. So we can go ahead and claim that certain non-personal data or aggregated data should also belong to PSUs or to the unions. But then we have to have the capacity to use that data effectively to mount a challenge to private and to private capital. So I think it's about time for unions to start thinking about these capacity building measures. So not just by understanding how all of this works, but also through the technical skills that are needed uh, to make these systems actually function.
Thanks a lot, Zai. So very concrete points and options for intervention also. Um, do we have more comments from the floor? Anyone who would like to intervene and say a few more words? It can be a question or a comment. Okay, so I think we had a very fruitful discussion, and these are also in many ways new ideas for us that it will take some time to develop in more detail. For the PSI members here, just to remind everyone, I think there was an email from head office asking for language that has been used by unions to regulate data rights in our workplaces. And as you know, after PSI developed a report about how digitalization is impacting the workplace, now the idea is also to look at model clauses of what kind of language unions should be pushing for, and try to collect what has already been done to allow unions to build on the experiences in different countries, as this is really a global phenomenon. So do remember to share your experience on that. I think Narasimhan, you have already spoken about a lot of those elements that could definitely give a lot of content for this work that PSI is trying to do. I also want to remind you of two important, three actually, reports that PSI has published over this year. The first one is about digitalization in public services, and I'm going to share the link in the chat box. This is a report that looks at the kind of trends that are coming up in digitalization in public services, again, across the world, but it also has very concrete examples with case studies that you might find interesting if you haven't seen it yet. The second one is called Economic Rights in a Database Society, so developing on many of the arguments that Nandini did, talking about why this is important and relevant today, and what are the components of what economic data rights could mean, including for workers. And the last one is called Surrendering Public Good to the Private Interest, and looks more specifically at the digital trade rules, how big tech is pushing for them, aiming to use them. And again, it has case studies that include a case study from India. So do take a look at these documents when you have a chance. And this is the last of the series of webinars that we have. So really would like to thank all of you for your active participation. Thank the co-organizers that have really contributed in a very active way to try to frame this in a way that makes it most interesting. And a big thank to the interpreters that have been with us for the whole series. We will continue developing this work in PSI, and we really look forward to work with all of you on this in the future. So with that, I would like to close. So thank you very much, everyone. If you want to turn on your cameras and say bye, please feel free to.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Hi, thank you, Susanna.
Thank you, and bye.
Thank you. Good one.
Thanks, everyone.
नरसिम्हन,
Yes, sir.
कैसे है? वो पानी भर गया था, क्या हुआ?
अरे घर में सब पानी आ गया साहब, पावर नहीं था, अभी थोड़ी देर पहले आया.
अच्छा,
Water entered my house also.
ऐसा? ओह, वो तो बहुत सीरियस मैटर था एक्चुअली.
Torrential rains.
Yeah. I've seen those scenes.
I was worried whether I can join the meeting or not, but luckily the power was restored.
Very good.
I could make it in time.
अच्छा, आपका दोस्त कैसे है?
दोस्त ठीक है, आपके दोस्त ठीक है.
Okay. Bye.
Bye, sir. Bye, Susanna. Bye.
Next program क्या है अपना?
Oh, it looks like I missed a question. Manasi had a question.
Programs fixed, that's good. Work from home.
So I have to say that it seems I missed a question. Manasi had raised her hands. I'm really sorry, Manasi, I have to say. I really didn't
now
see
she
it.
can ask now also. I can
If
take
you
that
are-
question.
Yes, Manasi, I apologize. And please,
Hello, ma'am. Yes.
please do raise your
There is
question.
my little question in my mind. In this globalization, where data governance is more important, if we have to achieve success, then is there need any action plan for the survival and betterment of workers at large by giving them knowledge about this subject at the plinth level?
Yeah, very good.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. And I think there is one more question. Haushila
Nargis?
Prasad?
Yes.
Nargis also wants to ask something.
Haushila Prasad Sharma. He has
One
asked the
more.
question.
Who wants to come in? Nargis, did you want to come in?
Nargis.
Yes, thank you very much for this participation and participant, all of you, and it's a good, very good presentation, all of you, Brother Norsiman. Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you.
Pleasure, Nargis. And I'm hearing that one more person wanted to ask a question.
I was a question I have written to Mr.
Okay, you had only.
Yes.
I think one interpreter also identified one more question that was asked. Chaitra, who did you think wanted to ask a question? Okay, so if no one is coming forward, I think we do would like to answer Manasi's questions. So if you want to go ahead, Narasimhan.
Yeah, data governance is an issue which needs awareness by every member, every worker. And as Mansi has rightly said it, the awareness has to be increased through education. You have to conduct awareness meetings. They should know what are their rights and where they can intervene, they can question how they can protect the data. These issues have to be enlightened. The workers have to be enlightened. It is the duty of the union to do it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Definitely.
Narasimhan, do you think that the PSU data will be available to the unions?
No, I am telling about awareness about the issue, not about the data.
Okay. But then, yeah, go on.
How data can be given to the unions? Only the procedures, how it is being collected, how it is being used, what are the things which they are collecting, these things can be shared with you, with the unions.
Particularly, you see, number of employees, means the details of employees, their appointment, their promotion, retirement, whatever things are there. It will be beneficial to the unions which represent the employees. I think this will facilitate the better, for a discussion, for demanding, for all other things for a union. So I don't think that this will be shared by the public sector.
No, the information which the unions get more access, it will, their management feels it creates more problems for them.
That's right. Even you cannot give.
Okay, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks a lot. Again, we'll go. Bye.
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 Bye.